The Joseph Priestley House was built in 1798 after Priestley and his family emigrated here from their home in England. Today, we're going to take you on a tour of the house, so let's hand it over to the docents.
Welcome to the Joseph Priestley House. We're so glad you came to visit us today. Right now I'm standing in the courtyard. We have a replica of the barn that was here when Joseph Priestley lived in the house. As you're coming to the house, you would be greeted by paid servants. And in here, you would come in this front main entrance. This is the foyer area. You, of course, would wait here to be announced to the family that you had come to visit. The first room that you're going to go into will be the library, where Dr. Priestley spent a lot of his time.
We were greeted by Ron Blatchley, a retired chemistry teacher who, for 27 years, has portrayed Joseph Priestley during special events at the house.
He had here everything that he really needed for day-to-day business. He had his desk over here with writing materials. He had books above that. Actually, all of the walls were lined with books. He had a day bed there so he could take a nap, and in his later years he actually slept on that. He pretty much lived in this room the last couple of years of his life.
Each room in the house features artifacts or reproductions that give a glimpse into Priestley's life. The house itself has interesting architectural features not seen in today's modern construction.
The windows here also have these very nice shutters, which are on the inside, and would have closed like that, but when open, they fold into the frame of the window and virtually disappear. The entrance to the laboratory is through this jib door. The jib door is actually a window. It's made to look like a window. So the window slides up and down, and the door is down here, which when closed and with the sash down, looks just like the other windows in the room.
In Priestley's laboratory, Blatchley gave us a little more history about Joseph Priestley the man.
In this very room, he discovered carbon monoxide. It was the only one he did here. The rest of them were all done back in England. He was born in England, in the north, near Leeds, a little town of Birstall, in 1733. And he was raised there. He was raised to be a clergyman. That was determined right off the bat that he was going to be a clergyman. And he always considered himself a clergyman during his entire life. He met Ben Franklin, and Franklin talked to him about electricity. And Priestley became so interested in it that he borrowed some materials, some books, some apparatus from Franklin, and he started doing his own original experiments. Ended up writing the definitive book on electricity. Political views were also very, very contentious. He supported the French Revolution and the American Revolution. Now that didn't make him unique in England by a long shot, but it didn't make him very popular with the ruling authorities. And so in 1791, on the anniversary of Bastille Day, the first anniversary of Bastille Day, an angry mob stormed his house, his church. They burned them to the ground, destroyed everything that he had, and he and Mary, his wife, and the rest of the family barely escaped with their lives.
That fire sent the family to London for a few years, but by then Priestley was such a controversial figure in England that a move to America seemed wise.
He came out here to just kind of find a quiet place to retire. Here in Northumberland, Priestley was able to build this very comfortable house. It was the largest, grandest house in town by a long shot. And unfortunately, Mary never got to live in the house. She died before it was finished.
Priestley continued to conduct experiments and even set up classes for children in the town, which he taught in his home.
He was an inveterate writer. He was always writing something. And he wrote during his lifetime dozens of books most on religious topics, theological topics, but many on scientific topics.
Just across the hall from the library is the Priestley's parlor.
In this room, the Priestley's drawing room, or parlor, they entertained their guests. They also used it for Sunday church services because they didn't have a structure for the Unitarian workshop at that time. Unitarians were a small minority, but Dr. Priestley was their leader, and they would have those services here.
In addition to telling me about the room, Mrs. Brooke told me about Priestley's place in the world in the 1790s.
I think we need to talk sometimes about how famous Priestley was at the time.
Oh, really?
He was a world-renowned figure, and some people thought he was, a dangerous radical. Actually, he was a very mild-mannered person, but his thinking was very advanced. He was a very progressive thinker. He was sort of a refugee, a political refugee, in fact, when he came to this part of the country. But his fame spread before him.
From the parlor, we moved on to the kitchen. It is likely the Priestleys had an iron cooktop heated by wood in their kitchen, since they had one in England. There's even a warming oven at the side of the main fireplace. The back kitchen is where much of the messier food preparation was done, and it has its own very special feature.
But the house has its own well, and it's right in here.
Wow!
And so if you were a servant here, it was quite a bit easier than in some places, because most places people were walking to a well outside the house.
The last room to visit downstairs is the dining room.
This is the main dining room of Dr. Priestley's house, and this room was used not only for eating, but when the groups would get together, they would sit here sometimes for several hours, because if there was friends or visitors passing through, that's when they exchanged information from around the town and from Philadelphia, New York.
A key feature in this room is an artifact that actually belonged to the Priestleys.
There's not too many pieces of furniture that actually belong to the Priestleys here, because most of them have been lost. But this clock is one of them.
Upstairs, one bedroom has been restored to look as it would have for Mrs. Priestley, Dr. Joseph Priestley's daughter-in-law. She became the head of the household when Mary Priestley died.
She would do all her menu writing over there. She would write to all her friends in England. And you can see different things she would teach the children, all about the plants and fauna in the area. They learned to tat, they learned to knit. The boys learned to knit too. There was too much to do for one woman, so the boys did as much as the girls. If Mrs. Priestley had company, they would come up here and have tea. They considered this area the women's area.
This clock is another that belonged to Joseph Priestley. It was presented to him by the French general Lafayette. Over the years, the Priestley house changed hands several times. Fortunately, very little was altered on the inside, so it still appears much as it did when it was built in 1798. The exterior did have a porch added at some point, which was later removed, and the picket fencing was replaced with the more accurate solid wood fence that you see today. With so much history right here in our backyard, it was disappointing to residents when the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission announced its intentions last year to close the Priestley House. The Friends Board acted upon the wishes of area residents and worked to reopen the Priestley House. The state still owns and maintains the site, but there are no longer any state employees at the facility. In July, the Priestley House opens its doors to 1st through 5th graders for History Camp. Special events also bring lots of activity and visitors to the Joseph Priestley House. There is so much more to learn about the life of Joseph Priestley. I encourage you to spend an hour at the museum to discover more about this fascinating Pennsylvanian. Well, that does it for this episode of In Your Neighborhood. Remember, if you have a story idea, you can send it to me at jenwakeman@ccn-news.com, and be sure and check out our Facebook fan site. I'm your host, Jennifer Wakeman. Thanks for watching.